Hey, folks, welcome back to Getting In a College Coach Conversation. We had a great discussion in the first segment today, talking a little bit about what it's like to go to school in the heart of the city. And now we are getting out of town and talking a little bit about what it's like to be a student in a more remote or rural setting. Joining us to do that is one of our newer team members. He is a former admission officer at Brown University and at Hamilton College, where he's also an alumnus. Ryan Krebs, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ian. It's great to be here.
I'm great to have you. And I'm going to start with the same question that I asked Tova and Lauren in the last segment, which is where did you grow up and go to high school? And as you were thinking about the places that you were considering for your college experience, what were the considerations that you were making with respect to setting? Did you want to be in a more rural setting, or were you kind of all over the map?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small rural community in Iowa, and everybody from my high school essentially had three options. If you were in the top half of the class, you went to a local state university. If you were in the bottom half, you went to either a local community college or you joined the military or the workforce. And so for me, I was in the top half of my class. I was planning on going to the University of Northern Iowa to study accounting. And during my senior year of high school, I had a really good football season. And one of my neighbors on my street happened to work at a local college, which was Grinnell College.
Mhm.
And the football coaches reached out to me saying, you should really look at our school. And I didn't really know much about the school, even though it was only a couple blocks from my parents' house. But they brought me on campus. I got to learn a little bit about the liberal arts. I got to learn a little bit about their football program. And it just seemed so different than what most of the students in my high school were doing. But I knew it was a really hard school to get into. A lot of the students were coming from places like Chicago, New York, San
Yeah.
Francisco, way outside of rural America. But I applied, ended up getting in, and was excited to try something different. And so for me, I only applied to, I think it was 3 total schools. And Grinnell was the one that stuck out to me as the place where I wanted to go because it was just so different than anything else that I had seen out there for colleges.
How different was Grinnell in terms of its setting from where you grew up? Did you feel like there was a big transition? I know that Grinnell is one of those schools that really, I haven't been there, but talking to admission officers who were there, that feels quite remote, many hours away from kind of your nearest city. How did that adjustment kind of play out for you?
Yeah, so Grinnell was literally 2 blocks from my parents' house. So I went to college closer than I went to high school, elementary school, or middle school.
Okay.
Very bizarre experience, but I would say being on the Grinnell campus, it felt like I was a world away from the rural Iowa community that I grew up in. And that was one of the things that I really loved about Grinnell. They try to, at the time, position themselves as not in the middle of nowhere, but in the middle of everywhere. I think that's kind of a hard sell once you're in
Yeah.
Grinnell, Iowa, because it's pretty far from everything. But the real beauty was that you got to connect with the other students that are on campus. And I've worked at some really great schools that have great numbers in terms of diversity and where students are coming from. But because those schools were larger, sometimes students fall into like their own groups. Whereas at Grinnell, everybody had to interact with everybody. And so it was a really cool way to get to learn about where other people were coming from, the different parts of the world that they were from, because Grinnell has a really high international student population. And it's really enriched my experience as an alum because I have friends all over the US and all around the world.
So this is really interesting because you're keying in on kind of a distinction between a small college and a big university, but you could have both types of educational experience in the middle of nowhere, right? I kind of I think Penn State is probably a pretty good example of a place that, it's a college town. How is there a difference between being in a more remote setting at a big university versus being in a remote setting for a small college? Is it really a distinct difference in terms of what your experience is like with respect to that setting, that location?
Yeah, so from my experience visiting some of those bigger schools that are in remote areas, they tend to have either big sports teams or a big college town feel to them where you have a lot of access to opportunities off of campus.
Mhm.
Being at a small college in a remote area, that's really the cultural hub for that community. And that's an exciting thing as a student, because a lot of what you're doing, whether you're writing for the newspaper, playing on the sports team, or performing for the theater, you're the star of the show. That's what everyone's reading the newspaper, everyone's going to the sporting events, and so that's a really cool thing. But at the same time, a lot of people from those small communities visit that small college, and they're supporting those programs as well. So it's a much more intimate environment, and you're really getting to know the other students, the faculty members, and administrators quite well.
When we were discussing in the last segment, I was sort of thinking about, Reed, where I went to school. If you kind of airlifted Reed and you dropped it somewhere else, it's great that it's in Portland. That's a wonderful feature, but it's not really something that changes the overall academic and social experience. But, students there talk about the bubble. It has a very tight-knit community, very similar to Grinnell. I think if you put Reed in the middle of Iowa, you might have a pretty similar experience to what Reed looks like when it's in Portland. Are there essential properties to being in Grinnell, to being in Iowa, that make Grinnell what it is? Or could you take that campus and, magically put it in the middle of a city or put it somewhere else and have a very similar experience? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, I think Grinnell is really tied to its place, in part because that the students that are choosing to go there are purposely choosing to go to the middle of nowhere to have a college experience. And so I think the people that it attracts is a unique group of people, but also some of the experiences there off campus are unique to its setting in Iowa. Iowa is the first state to have the caucuses. So Grinnell is a very political campus, and a lot of candidates come through campus once every 4 years. So that's really exciting. Given that students are in college for 4 years, you get one of those experiences during your time there. And then Grinnell also has different centers on its campus, like the Center for Prairie Studies, which is unique to its setting and allows students to study both the science of the prairie, but also, issues related to policy and development around sort of the natural setting of Iowa.
So, yeah, I mean, and that's really cool. And I think it's interesting to think about those relationships. Now, you're someone that you grew up a couple of blocks away from Grinnell. You went to Grinnell. You then went to Hamilton to work in admission. So there's like this kind of theme for you in terms of small town. And I know that when you went to Providence and Brown is a little bit bigger, a little bit different. How often do you see students that are coming from big cities that are drawn to smaller towns? Is that does it happen often? Is it rare to run into a Chicago native at a place like Grinnell? What's the general distribution of students, and do those kids feel antsy? Like, are they like, there's nothing to do? I gotta get some more action. Like, this is a little bit too quiet for me. How did that play out?
I would say a place like Grinnell probably doesn't have too much overlap with a place like NYU,
Mhm.
but they do get plenty of students from the cities and suburbs across the U.S. And my perspective as a local student that was going to Grinnell College, I always saw it as a school for the city people, or the people from the coast. And so I think a lot of students come from urban and suburban environments, and they're purposely coming to Grinnell because they want to get away. They know that they're going to live in cities for most of their life, and this is their one opportunity to live in a small town and a small community, and to have that sort of Americana experience per se. And I think the students that are choosing to go to these remote places, they're going to those schools for a reason. In Iowa and at Grinnell specifically, it's very much about community. I think you could say something similar about Hamilton, but Hamilton's also in the foothills of the Adirondacks. And so there's an outdoorsy vibe there. A lot of students like to ski and hike and snowshoe, and the outdoor club was huge at Hamilton. And so a lot of students see it as a place to get a really good education while also doing things outside the classroom that they really enjoy.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about, with respect to the city experience, that the different cities have different flavors, that you could be in a city in Omaha, Nebraska. It doesn't have to be New York City. And I think it's a great reminder that Grinnell is going to be really different from Hamilton, is going to be really different from Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington. You have schools that take on characteristics of their locations, even if they're not cities, right? That just, they're fed by those kinds of opportunities. And I think it's important for students to be aware of that as they're visiting schools and assessing kind of the features that might be available to them there. When you grew up around Grinnell, so you spent a lot of time there before graduating. One of the great features of urban schools is often that students will graduate and then they'll get work in that same city. And so it extends some aspect of their social life from college. It's like, all right, now I'm not hitting the books. I can kind of explore a little bit more. I can take advantage of the nightlife. I don't have homework. But that it seems to me that that wouldn't be something that you would find all that often at smaller schools. And most people are leaving after they graduate. What is the effect of that on community, on the alumni network, on just that sense of connective tissue with your classmates?
Yeah, well, I'd say that a lot of alums, both from Grinnell and at Hamilton, they end up in the major US cities. So they have really strong alumni networks in places like Chicago, New York, DC, and San Francisco. And so there's a lot of places where I go and I immediately fall into that the old Grinnell ties. We can connect. There's places where a lot of Grinnell people will meet up as alums to reflect on their time at the college. And there's also sort of this idea of going back to the campus too and experiencing some of the traditional experiences at Grinnell. And so I think there is still the strong tie to get back to Iowa and see the campus, but at the same time, the connections that you make over those 4 years, those become some of the best friends that you're going to have your entire life. So whether it's going to weddings, just meeting up in cities as you're traveling for work, there's a really strong network at these small colleges.
Do you find people are going back to campus for alumni and reunions, weekends, and things like that at Grinnell? Are people often coming back, or do they kind of say, "Oh, that was my 4 year experience, and I love connecting with my alumni network in my city, but I don't have a need to go back to campus and reconnect with the place"? Yeah, with both Grinnell and Hamilton, what was the experience there?
Yeah, so both schools have really strong reunion programs. Hamilton actually keeps an open invite for graduates to come back each and every year if they would like. Grinnell keeps it a little bit more on a cadence of every 5 years there are cluster reunions. So you come back not just with your class, but the class above and below you.
Oh,
And
cool.
that's rotating every 10 years or so. And then on your 10-year reunion, you come back as your individual class. But a lot of the people that you connect with during your time at Grinnell aren't just the students, it's the faculty and the administrators. And so a lot of alums like to go back and see those people as well, whether that is going back for the reunion weekend in the summer, which is a really great time to be in Iowa, or if you're going back for an event that's tied to something that you were a part of, whether that's a sporting event, a big event within the music or theater scene. So students and our, excuse me, alumni do feel a draw to get back to campus, but given its location, it's not something that they can do every so
Yeah, just
often.
pop in. Yeah, you're not flying direct to Grinnell, Iowa.
Right.
Um, with city campuses, I think one of the perceptions for students is if I go there, there's going to be something for me because cities have something for everyone. And so I'll eventually find my niche. With smaller campuses, I think there is sometimes a fear that if I don't like it, this is all there is. There's not a whole lot for me to explore here. And so I'm wondering, as putting your counselor's hat on and thinking about supporting students in identifying their fit, especially for more remote, more rural institutions, what are the things that they should be looking for to kind of assess that fit as prospective students? Are there differences in terms of how they might visit a rural campus versus a more urban campus?
Right. I think for students that really care about community, a rural school can work really well for them.
Mhm.
I felt during my time at Grinnell that there was often too many activities that I wanted to take part in that I couldn't actually do all of those things. And I saw the same thing while working at Hamilton, is that students were busy nonstop because the school's putting a lot of programming on to keep students entertained and excited about being there. But these are also the types of students that are excited to create their own programming and create new opportunities, bring speakers to campus. And so there's usually something going on almost every night of the week. And so I think if you really care about community, you want to make those connections with people from different backgrounds, a small campus is a great place. Now, if you're a student thinking that you are really focused on pre-professional opportunities, you want access to things outside of a small knit community where you're seeing the same people every day, then perhaps a city is a better environment for you. But I think, like so many of my friends from Grinnell, they knew that going to a small college in the middle of nowhere was something they could only do one time in their life, and they could live in a city and have that city experience the rest of it. So they made the same decision I made, and I think it was a really awesome experience.
One of the things I love about small schools in general, and I think those that are especially polarizing in terms of their experiences, whether it's a Grinnell from setting and academics, read academically, they're able to be unapologetic about saying, this is not for everyone. If you're going to like it, you're really going to like it. And if you're not, then that's okay, because there are a lot of other options for you. So see if it's for you. But, if you don't love Grinnell, I think that's fine. They're going to find, a great population of students to come in for their class every single year. Ryan, thanks for coming on the show. It was a lot of fun talking to you about small town colleges.
Yeah, thank you, Ian.
Glad to have you. All right, folks, when we come back, we are going to talk through the FAFSA with a top 10 list of the most important FAFSA questions. Don't go away.